as you heard earlier, we are going to welcome Andrea Renda, who is the Research Fellow at the Centre for European Policy, and that's CEPS here in Brussels, very well known. He's the head of Global Governance, Regulation, Innovation and the Digital Economy. Andrea, we're really, really pleased to have you with us today. I think you're going to tell us about what you believe are the big things for the future of public services. So I'm going to hand over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and good morning, everybody. Good morning also to Max, and fantastic introduction. A lot of good vibrations in this conference that promises really a lot of fresh ideas in what is a topical moment. We are about to see tomorrow the publication of the first ever all-encompassing proposal on the regulation of AI that will have many consequences for governments as well. We have many other initiatives ongoing that will shape the future of the digital economy, and in particular Europe's approach to it. And that is very important. And in recent times, I'm actually reflecting quite a lot on whether the original mandate that was given to Commissioner Vestager, making Europe fit for the digital economy, is really representative of what we're trying to do here. Because with all the problems and the sort of mixed results that we had in the first years of the life of cyberspace, if you wish, we probably also have to make an effort. We have realized that we have to make an effort to make the digital economy increasingly fit for Europe, for its values, for its goals, for its principles. And so the first message that I want to launch here is that whatever your vision is on the future of public services and government, technology has to be taken as a means and not as an end. Technology is a way to achieve the vision of society that we're giving ourselves, in particular when we talk about resilience, when we talk about Agenda 2030, and more generally, the Sustainable Development Goals, which means public services, just as much as private services, have to help us row in the same direction and build a coherent picture. So if you go to the next slide, I just want to go really into an instant history of what we've seen in cyberspace over three decades. This is the way in which engineers used to depict cyberspace in the early days of the World Wide Web. We're talking about the early 90s, and here is basically a layered environment in which there is a common infrastructure, what we call the physical layer. There are common and open traffic rules. Anyone can go on that street. Anyone can develop applications. There's no need to ask permission to anybody. Anyone can run contents there. And this has led to an enormous explosion of the digital economy. But as I said before, it's also has led to overabundant information and also a lack of security and a lack of control for specific data flows, in particular when it comes to personally identifiable data, but also data that belong to the administrations, data that belong to industry. Now, 3 decades down the road, in a largely unregulated environment, and you see the next slide, where we are now in this living entity is largely a similar architecture, but the emergence of online intermediaries, there are private intermediaries that store most of the data in the cloud, has really become a huge centripetal force. I mean, what's the role for government here? Well, it's been very little, a very weak role, because government, first of all, has decided not to regulate this space. And you could say it might have been a good idea at the beginning, but it's gradually, we all came to realize that some degree of regulation at the different layers was needed. And at the same time, government cannot find its own space where it develops itself as a platform for offering data under secure conditions for developing services in the future. So to go to the next slide, it will be a little bit shocking, but this is how I see today the evolution of the digital architecture as the European Commission and other EU institutions are trying to develop it, which means a connectivity layer. You see this towards the bottom, which is a family of technologies. Depending on the use case, we will have different technologies, a flourishing Internet of Things, and an intermediate layer with the cloud, which is the edge. You've seen this in the communication of the digital compass, the decentralized architecture that will make over time our digital economy less dependent on the tech giants if we approach it in the right way. At the same time, more decentralized, more resilience, and perhaps also more environmentally friendly. The blossoming Internet of Things, a central layer, which is the federated cloud, But on top of this, as those of you that are familiar, for example, with the ISA², with the building blocks in the work of the Commission, will recognize, we will have increasingly and mandatorily in the Internet of the future a digital authentication and verification layer, and a layer of legal and semantic interoperability where we check compliance of data flows with European Union legislation. This is also part of what Gaia-X tries to achieve. And then on top of this, we have the data strategy and the data spaces, some of which will be horizontal, and some of which, you see this in the top left of this slide, will be sectoral. On the other side, top right, you see one specific data space, which is the European digital government space. And there, really what these need is not just developing inside that box services, protocols, specifications, and a lot of goodwill and voluntary cooperation between people. It requires all the layers below. It requires an open data space for public administration. It requires the legal semantic interoperability layers. It requires the e-identification layers. It also requires that we have end users that increasingly have the skills to enter into this new world, and also the two cross-cutting developments that you see on the two sides. Artificial intelligence uses in a way that is trustworthy throughout government and also outside government, and also the implementation of what we call the PIMS, the personal information management systems that enable user control over data in a constant dialogue with government. Now, if you believe that, this is for framing our discussion for today and the coming days, you will see that in this whole space, government increasingly plays a number of different roles in different layers and in different ways. So if you go to next slides, I will quickly reflect on what kind of roles I see for government going forward. Certainly, as a single message, a much bigger and stronger role of government than the non-role that government has played in the first 3 decades of the World Wide Web, meaning until European Union legislators started to interfere meaningfully with cyberspace, for example, with the GDPR. Obviously, government remains as a regulator, although with different tools that really exploit digital technologies. As an auditor in real-time anomaly detection, through secure data exchanges, through SupTech and GovTech solutions. As a service provider, through enhanced trustworthy algorithmic decision-making, coupling the need for trust in technology that is so deteriorating at the moment with efficient solutions in government. So this is largely also what the Tallinn Declaration tries to advance over time. Government is trustee, really the place where users place their faith on data flows and act in a more secure environment, sharing their data in exchange for customized solutions and in full compliance with our fundamental right to privacy and data protection. But government is also increasingly a catalyst and a platform, really a locus for collecting, aggregating data and offering this data for reuse for good in compliance with EU legislation and in the pursuit of sustainable development and resilience over time. Is this easy? It's obviously very difficult. We're at the beginning of a journey, and the real difference is that we now have government at the center of all this. So the next and final slide, I just want to express this. So we are seeing just like falling shooting stars coming in proposals in many respects on this layered architecture that I showed before. What we see there is that the interoperability policy becomes the glue and the needed critical condition for all the other policies to really work together towards a meaningful outcome. In particular, the proposals that you see on the data strategy, on AI, on government as a platform, especially in the member states, but increasingly at the EU level, on digital ID, on skills and infrastructure, on trustworthy AI and IoT, and also the development of proposals on enhancing user control over data. All this is needed. If I wanted to use an expression typically used in IT, these are all complementors, meaning just like applications and hardware are for the large multi-sided platforms on the internet, these are complementors. And the real platform at the center is the European digital governance space. I think we can make it work, but we're going to need all the 2,000 people that are connected today, and even more and all member states, local governments, and EU institutions to really make it work. It's difficult, but it's a way to finally steer the development of the digital economy towards what Europe wants to achieve in terms of values, principles, and goals in the medium term. So thanks for your attention, and I give the floor back to Jennifer, I think.
For that really insightful view. We've got a couple of questions and comments from our audience. One says that it appears that the Internet of Things is really at the bottom of everything. I mean, Andrea, do you agree with that? Do you think that this Internet of Things, as we call it, or machine-to-machine communication, is the sort of underpinning technology going forward?
Well, listen, Jennifer, a while ago, I was working on a study on Europe in 2035 for the European Parliament. So I went around and asked experts whether they expected the Internet of Things to really flourish and at what speed. And some experts told me that while today we have an estimated perhaps 8 billion connected devices at the global level, they expect 1 trillion devices to be connected in 2035. So can you, Jennifer, imagine a world with 1 trillion connected devices? This means that we have a fifth element. We have an envelope made of data that surround us. We have the need for artificial intelligence systems that really govern and optimize these flows of information. We have algorithms interacting with each other. It's a future in which we will need quantum computers to really optimize things that we would not be able to manage with our own, only our own brains, which are formidable machines, but they need support in that respect. So indeed, I do believe that the hype and the interest that we've had on regulating AI and the policies and to promote AI developments over the past couple of years will be soon replaced by a equal, or if anything, even greater emphasis on how to make the most of this development, which is the emergence of the internet's peripheral nervous system, really the connected things that will make many, many things possible that today are currently beyond reach.
Well, I have trouble imagining. I've trouble even grasping the concept of the number 1 trillion in my head. And I think a lot of people probably find the same thing. Another question we have from the audience is, what is the role of AI? They said that interoperability is a key for successfully building the digital decade ecosystem of the future, but what's the role of AI? I mean, I think when we get to numbers as big as this, the human brain can't do all these computations, and even teams and teams of people are not going to be capable of managing the sheer amount of data. So I guess AI is essential, but I noticed on your last slide, Andrea, that you had trustworthy IoT/AI. I mean, how important is it in building that in if we don't really, the average citizen doesn't really understand how it works?
Yeah, to some extent, a new wave of the discussion on trustworthy AI starts tomorrow when the European Commission will release its proposal for a European approach to regulating artificial intelligence. And what's going to happen there, it's the mainstreaming into public policy of a concept that I myself have been working on when I was a member of the EU high-level expert group on artificial intelligence. A trustworthy artificial intelligence is essential because AI is just what you make of it. It can be used for good and for bad. If it's badly used, it can lead to, for example, flagrant violation of fundamental rights. And all the principles on which the rights to a good administration is built can be easily violated if one misuses AI. So trustworthy AI means compliant AI that is compliant with legal rules, AI that is aligned with ethical principles, but also AI that is resilient and robust, or how we defined it, socio-technically robust. This is absolutely needed. So I agree with you that AI will be essential. Interoperability is essential also to make the most of AI, meaning AI needs data that are interoperable, that are really aggregated in a way that is made usable to these systems. But at the same time, AI needs to be developed and deployed with the adequate guarantees for citizens, for users, for all individuals, so that their fundamental rights are respected. Use in public administration can easily lead to discrimination and bias. Virtually all fundamental rights are potentially affected by AI. So we need the freedom to dream about the good uses of AI without the nightmares of the bad uses that might emerge if we don't keep an eye on the way it's developed and deployed.
Absolutely. I know we've talked in the past a lot about protection of fundamental rights, data protection, privacy, and all these things, and avoiding the sort of dystopian sci-fi nightmares we sometimes hear about. But what I want to ask you, Andrea, the final question, we're talking here about public administrations, and so it therefore becomes very important. This can be about things to do with your taxes, your healthcare, your education. It's very different to the AI that people maybe think about when they think of social media or they think of commercial services. And yet very often it's those commercial services that are leading the way in AI technology. Do you think there is a tension there, or do you think that there is a role for public administrations to maybe lead commercial entities towards more ethical AI?
Well, this is what we're trying to do. No? The Commission is trying to regulate AI users that are considered to be high risk. This is certainly the AI that will be used in many government services, but it's also any AI that has the potential to discriminate, to nudge people excessively towards certain behaviors that otherwise wouldn't take place. So there's a lot of commercial AI deployment in all of this. Now, that said, the reason why the tech sector and the private sector has been leading on AI is exactly what, in a very sketchy way, I've tried to illustrate in the first slides of my presentation. The reason why we have so much machine learning being deployed today is that the early days of the internet has led to such a blossoming and proliferation of digital information that those that were able to capture the attention of the end users and aggregate that information actually need to invest in machine learning to be able to make the most of it, to detect patterns, to customize services, to do user profiling for good or bad. So the moment governments realize that they can make the most of data by achieving unprecedented levels of efficiency, they will need to develop their own way of developing and deploying AI, which is to be perhaps even more trustworthy than the one that would expect from the private sector. And I think this is a new generation. I mean, government has missed largely the first generation of the digital revolution. The second has to be about government, because we need strong government in order to really govern this ship, which otherwise would go easily beyond control.
Well, before I let you go, I've just seen another question come in from the audience, and I really like it, so I'm going to put it to you briefly. In an interconnected world, how can governments regulate separately? Shouldn't we have decisions on a supranational level? So I guess the question is, global Europe, how does that work?
Well, I think to some extent we have a very sophisticated way of approaching subsidiarity at the EU level, and information technology experts have a very sophisticated way of approaching subsidiarity themselves. We have to start matching the two. There's a scope, there is a role for every level of government in how we conceptualize the future European digital governance space and even the global governance space. And the more we go into the local level, the more we need to ensure that there is empowerment of the local communities, and there is, as much as possible, use of decentralized architecture. This is what we are discovering. The good thing, this obviously would require another talk, but what I can say is the good thing about digital technologies is that we can achieve, for the first time, a globally interconnected world with extremely local solutions that are all interoperable between themselves. And this is something that was not possible in the analog world. We need to exploit that by having even the single market, not necessarily relying on a limited number of giants, but having rules and protocols and specifications that apply everywhere and that can be replicated everywhere, empowering the communities at the local level in the same way throughout the territory of the Union. This is the type of subsidiarity that is possible when we talk about decentralized, distributed architectures in technology, and we can achieve that. I think it would be, given the possibilities of technologies, also in line with a meaningful way of approaching subsidiarity when we think about how to design, in terms of public policy, the European digital governance space.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for your insights. I know you and I and many of those watching will be watching with bated breath tomorrow to see this AI proposal from the Commission. So we'll, I'm sure, have many conversations about it in the future. Thank you very much again for joining DigitALL.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks,
We'll
Max.
talk to you again soon.
Good luck.
Thank you. Max, we've got lots and lots of questions coming in. We won't have time to answer them all, and of course we have to let Andrea go and get our next speakers ready. But I'm going to ask you one as well, which is, does the EU encourage non-member states to use the building blocks that we've heard about? Yes or no? I mean...
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. This is one of the things that we are very proud about and that we think is the way to go. Now, I don't know whether Andrea is still here, because he maybe has his own ideas also on that. But clearly, a big right. Yes from our side. The whole idea is to develop jointly the specifications, the concepts, the standards around interoperability at large. Develop reusable solutions based on open standards, on open source, wherever this is possible. And this means that it can be reused globally. And actually, we are very proud that we have lots of partners around the world, from countries like Uruguay to Ukraine, deep contacts into Japan, reusing some of the contacts, and of course in the immediate neighborhood of the EU in the Western Balkans, for example. But we will hear about this later in the conversation with our international guests.
Absolutely. I think a lot of the questions I'm seeing here, I'm already putting them aside for this afternoon's moderating. So please don't forget to stay with us over the 3 days. You can browse the agenda online. If you're not sure about which programs you want to go, all the videos will be available afterwards. So don't worry if you miss something, it's going to be there to continue the discussion. Now, we have another comment from our audience, and I think it goes right to what we're talking about for the next few days. They say, the challenge is to go from declarations to tangible results for the citizen. I'm sure you agree with that.
Yes, yes, very, very much. And I'm grateful for this comment, grateful also for the comments and the discussions that we see, that we are very happy that we see evolving on the chat. So please continue. Tell us what you think, tell us what you like, tell us also what you don't like. Sometimes it's enough to just do a thumbs up or a thumbs down, because we want to feel the interaction with you, something that we are missing here. I mean, you can't see it, but there is a cool studio around us with lots of colleagues, super busy, making sure that everything works to the second. But of course, it would be so much nicer to have an audience full of people shouting and discussing and throwing in ideas. But what you said is a very good point. The EU is criticized for coming with grandiose declarations, with grandiose statements. But what is about the implementation? And something that Andrea said, I think is very nice, really to keep in the back of our head, because this is what drives us, is to empower the local level, to make the difference felt at the local level. So this is, in a way, digital making subsidiarity work. Subsidiarity, another grandiose declaration, a big word, but what does it mean? It means that I can work at my local level, in my city, in my department, in my company. I can access the world. I can connect, like Andrea said, to partners all around Europe, all around the world. And in order to make that happen, we and the people around in the conference today, I think, behind the two programs, behind the new program, Digital Europe, say we need to join forces. We need to get it together. So yes to the local, yes to implementation.